with and killed 6 Palestinians. And they started the rocket fire again in November. I went back over there in December. I think that was December the 14th I was there. I went to Lebanon primarily, and then I went on to Syria and met with Hamas. And I asked them again, let's reinstall the terms of the ceasefire. And they gave us word that they would be willing to if the food supplies and so forth could be opened. I couldn't come back to Israel, but my assistants, Robert Pastor is one, Dr. Robert Pastor, whom you know, and another one is Herrera Balin, who's in charge of the Carter Center's conflict resolution program. He's a Lebanese. They went to Israel, and they relayed this proposition to the Israeli officials. And a day later, they were informed that they would only increase the supplies of food to a 15% level, which was not acceptable to Hamas. So the rocket fire continued, and that's when it erupted into an attack by Israel on Gaza. And now you mentioned another factor which is very important, whether Hamas would acknowledge Israel's right to exist. When I went, the main argument I had with the Hamas leaders was that I wanted them to agree with me that if Mahmoud Abbas, representing Fatah and representing the PLO, negotiated an agreement with Israel, that Hamas would accept it.
And represented the Palestine Authority.
Represented the Palestine Authority, but also as head of PLO. And he was negotiating with Israel. They committed to me and made a public statement to Al Jazeera and so forth that if such an agreement could be negotiated, they would accept it, every term in it, provided it was submitted to the Palestinian people in a referendum, or if there could be an honest, fair election conducted to create a unity government that would approve it. So they agreed to accept all the terms of any peace agreement if the Palestinian people approved it in an election or in a referendum.
You have a 6-point plan here. DMZ with the Palestinian state where you will have international peacekeepers. That's one thing.
Yeah.
Acceptable modifications in the border. Essentially go back to the 6-7 border, but some acceptable modifications.
Exactly.
The sharing of Jerusalem.
That's correct.
Number 4, the right of the Palestinians to return with compensation if they could legally justify. A commitment
but return primarily to Palestine.
To the West
Bank and Gaza. And a few might come back into Israel if approved on an individual basis. Those who can't would be compensated, yes.
A commitment to the reconciliation of the Palestinian people.
Which will be mandatory in order to have a peace agreement to start with, yes.
And a timetable saying that this ought to be accomplished within a certain, you may not like the word timetable,
well,
but sort of what you said.
No problem with that.
Okay. Those are the things that you think are the plan that will get us there.
Exactly. And let me say, and that's almost exactly the same thing as the United Nations resolutions and the official U.S. policy and the policy of the International Quartet and also the proposal made by every Arab nation on earth. The Israelis have not yet decided to withdraw from the West Bank back to the proximity with Jerusalem, which would leave, under my proposal, and others, which would leave half of the Israeli settlers in Palestine and deed that property to Israel as part of Israel. And then Israel could give an equivalent amount of property to the Palestinians, possibly as a corridor between the West Bank and Gaza, which is about 30 miles. And that corridor would still be controlled for security purposes by Israelis. This is something I talked at length with Ariel Sharon about. And he approved of that when I was talking to him.
He had a very deep concern about the demographic problems that Israel faced.
You're right.
You know, and that's one of the reasons that he led to withdraw from Gaza.
I know.
Hoping it would start some kind of process.
That's right.
All right. We Can Have Peace in the Whole Land is the book by former President Jimmy Carter.